I always wanted to make a film about that period, and I had a very hard time finding the proper material. When I read The Pianist, I knew right away that that's something I wanted to do. And the reason was that the description of the events was extremely accurate, and that's because it was written immediately after the war. I don't think that somebody who writes a book about the events 20 or 30 years later can have the same type of recollections, the same type of detail, which was vividly true to me, a child of the same period.
I think what's wonderful about this story is that it's not a general perspective of it, but it focuses on one man's struggle and one man's strength through all of that.
It's about survival, survival of human being, the strength of the will to live against this terrible adversity, terrible horror.
The film is terrible, but it's optimistic. When you have the power and when you really want it, you can survive. Survive to everything, survive to the normal life every day, which is difficult, but survive also to extraordinary events. So I think it's a message of hope.
The book is written with astonished and cold objectivity. There are good Jews and bad Jews in the film, and that's how it was. There are good Germans and bad Germans. There are good Poles and bad Poles. And above all, the book is tremendously optimistic. The victim survives thanks to his passion for the art and for the music in particular, thanks to his willpower. It's an optimistic and uplifting book in spite of the horrors that it describes.
From what I can deduct from his memoirs, at the point where the story takes place, he was just a very outgoing, kind of good-hearted young man. Everything was taken from him and everyone else. But what I learned about Szpilman after surviving all this is that he grew to have a very long life with a lovely wife who I've met, and he had a family and continued to compose and contribute all kinds of wonderful things. And Roman had a lot of similarities, so I got to envision Szpilman like Roman.
All my family was killed. My father survived a very hard concentration camp, Mauthausen in Austria. I hardly talked to my father about those times, but sometimes we would touch the subject, and what I got was the strength that helped him to survive is that he wanted to see me. He knew he had a child outside, and he wanted desperately to see Germany collapse. I was a kid, and I wanted to live. I wanted to see my parents. Among all possible type of suffering, the greatest was the separation from the parents. I think for the child, this is the saddest and most tragic, I would say, thing. Lack of comfort, hunger, whatever. It's absolutely secondary. But the longing to see my father walking in the snow towards me, that was the real sad thing. Wanting to see my mother, who was taken the first. There are a lot of similarities, but great differences too. Warsaw Ghetto lasted much longer than the Krakow. The Warsaw Ghetto lingered, and they let people literally starve to death within the walls. The Warsaw Ghetto was much bigger. It held at the beginning 360,000, and since the Germans were filling it up with all kinds of Jews from Europe, not only those who lived in Warsaw previously, it grew up to 500,000. And those people were dying on the streets. It was living a life of a community, so there were some people who were better off. There was someone who were crawling on the pavement. But it was a city in itself. And then they started deporting people to the death camps and brought it down to about 60,000. Then those 60,000 managed to organize themselves, and they were the fittest, because of course the Germans would first deport the old and sick and children. So they started the uprising. From that uprising, only a handful survived. Szpilman went through all that period. Here's the difference. I ran from the Krakow ghetto first to a family in the city of Krakow, and very soon to a peasant family in the country, virtually medieval. He survived in the ruins of the capital. We try to change as little as possible. We try to stick to the line of the book. But of course, to make a movie of it, you need the action. Very often, the events which were described, almost always, are not written like a novel, but they are all rather written like a journal, therefore unfilmable. So we had to give it a shape. We had to describe the concrete situations of which he speaks in his memoir. I think we are very faithful to the book.
It's a dreadful historical event, and you can't start glamorizing it, you can't start trying to soften it. You have to tell it as you believe it is. I mean, there is no ultimate truth of it, because nobody can really, we can't explain it in any way, so the truth is very difficult to get at. But whatever the truth is in you of that subject, in one, you have to be true to that truth.
Not only that you need a good script and a good writer who knows how to write about these events, but also because it's a very difficult period for the head. Where you write the script, you recollect, you come back to certain things. You study the films, the archives, and there are masses of them, the photographs. And this is very hard. And it's better to have someone with whom you want to go through all this mental or moral, or whatever you call it, psychological exercise. Ronnie Harwood is a perfect man for it. First of all, he has a great sense of humor. And all I remember is that we used to laugh all the time. It was a great fun, but there were moments, you know, where either he or I had tears in our eyes when we were really shaken. One observation that I made going through this archive footage and through the photographs, in which you can see most horrific things, is that when you watch it on the screen, you sometimes come out trembling. You forgot about one thing, that there must have been someone behind the camera who was actually filming all these horrors, photographing all this stuff. The people who are doing it were German Nazis. I put a crew in one scene, it's just a brief moment in the film, but even in this archive material, we can see German unit filming. So there must have been more than one. And they were doing it with gusto or with passion, or maybe they were doing it just cool to record for their military purpose. Difficult for me to understand, but some of those scenes are even staged. They were actually recording their masterpiece.
Roman, don't forget, was, of course, a wonderful touchstone because it had happened to him, but in Krakow. This is set in Warsaw. So I always had him as my yardstick.
He's been there. He lived there. He was a child. He saw his mother taken to Auschwitz, never coming back. He lived through all this horror.
Many people ask me, how difficult was it for you to shoot this type of film, to come back to the events of this sort that you went through? How difficult was it on this set? And the answer right away, it was not difficult at all. You're dealing with artifacts on the set. You're dealing with people who are disguised actors. You have all crew around you, behind you, although you don't see it on the screen, the hundreds behind. Technically, it was very difficult to shoot this film in Warsaw, but it seemed to me essential that the film is made in Warsaw. Certain scenes of the picture happen in pre-war Warsaw, the others in the ruins of Warsaw. Neither of this exists. Warsaw was totally razed by the Nazis. First, there was the bombardment of the Warsaw, then there was a ghetto uprising, then there was a Polish uprising, and then eventually, whatever has left from it after the Germans evacuated, the entire population was destroyed with dynamite and flamethrowers. So after the war, there was nothing. And what you have around you here in Warsaw was rebuilt, and it's a different type of architecture. with an exception of one area on the other side of the river where Soviet army sat on their asses and waited until the Polish uprising will be put down, because it was not a communist uprising and they wouldn't help them. That part of Warsaw, very small area called Praga, has buildings and streets of the period. They full still of impacts of the shrapnels, etc., but they stand. So we used that part for certain scenes from before the war with great help of our production designer, Alan Starsky, who built the ghetto walls around it and who put some buildings in the areas where there were new modern buildings. So that part was recreated, but with really great difficulties.
I was afraid that it could be annoying for people living in some areas that we are building, we are shooting during the night and all these things. But all people were moved by the images from the war, this is first. And the young people, because of the name of Roman Polanski, were pretty excited when they are looking for what we are doing. So it was pretty good for us to work in Warsaw.
We were very apprehensive because that part of Warsaw is inhabited by very rough trade, but we didn't have any difficulties with them. It seems that even they were in tune with our movie, except for some drunks would some suddenly spot me and came to kiss me on the mouth. But other than that, we didn't have any difficulties. The other parts, the other streets were constructed on a lot of that Babelsberg studio, built entirely by Starsky. It was a huge area that was constructed. And finally, the ruins, which don't exist anywhere.
So he told me, we have to find out where we can have these ruins. And we were scouting all over Europe to try to find ruins. The only thing which we got was a Russian camp, which was near Berlin, which has to be destroyed. So we got the authorization to destroy on demand. So what was the job of the set designer and Roman? It was to decide how much we have to destroy on every building.
These were previous barracks of Soviet army. And we made the deal with the company that owns those streets to destruct them. So we created our ruins. We just simply destroyed a part of the city.
The way that they managed to recreate the environment was unbelievable.
With Alan Starsky, the production designer, and Anna Shepard, the costume designer, we were trying to rebuild the world exactly as it was. Making this type of film is extremely important to be honest and to sort of step aside with your bright ideas and just tell the things as they were to our best recollection.
What I wanted to achieve myself, to create certain atmosphere with the costume and start using certain colors, start with a film full of color, typical color from 40s, which is like browns and special salmon pinks and reds and beautiful yellows, and then lose the color completely. And when the people are in the ghetto already and we see all the sad moments, we don't see color. It's very monochromatic.
And of course, they went through the great amount of research, myself also, and that's to their credit. It was for our own satisfaction that the smallest detail will be exact and give us a great thrill sometimes to find tiny little thing, you know, from the period and correct it so it will be exactly like that. They had already previous experience doing films of the period, both of them. But here I really didn't want to miss anything. And we also hired experts of the period. There are people who do this for a living and who are very able and tremendously knowledgeable in England, in France, in Germany and here. And we work with them a lot. In spite of that fact, Both Alan Starsky and Anna Shepard know both the looks of the places and the garb of the people. I sometimes remember details on which I would really grill them.
Roman remembers, and he has very particular image of certain things in his mind, and I'm expected to match up the image with his expectations, and that is very emotional.
We had sometimes very funny or heated discussions where I was always trying to prove that there was some kind of discrepancy.
I presume the man is quite well off because he gets impatient. You know, he like remembers better times. He's not like somebody very poor.
I think he's too well off. I think he should be shabby. He should
Okay, I
be
will change color.
run down. Okay, I would prefer a man who used to be well off.
I always have a stage fright, introducing him to a new group of actors or to big scene, because instinctively he will know if it's right or not.
One thing that is absolutely burned in my mind is the look and the mention of the armband with the Star of David of it, you know. And I had the constant struggle as far as the width of it was concerned, because width would vary, although there was a formal dimension given by the Germans, but you know, people would have different ones. There was also a specific way that the star should be designed. These things I remember very well.
My style, I always try to be very authentic, but in this movie it's very specific because Roman remembered it these times, and he really remembered them very good. So it's a challenge to fulfill his expectation, and it makes the movie even more exciting for me.
We tried to tell the story the way it was. It required to be quite humble of all of us involved, particularly of me, the director, but also very much of my director of photography.
We realized that it should be quiet film, low-key camera work, low-key lighting. Everything should be invisible. All technique, all our tricks, we should forget. We should think rather about the persons, about characters, and we should hide behind characters.
Everyone has tendency to show off his ability or his art, and they understood it very well, and they limited all those desires. And they served the picture. We just had to tell the story, and tell the story honestly, to our best recollection, at least those who remember those times, tell it the way it was, no more, no less.
After he showed me the film, Roman comes and goes like, this happened to me, this I experienced, this I saw. And you realize almost everything happened in this film is Roman Polanski's childhood, is his life, is what he suffered through, what he saw, what he experienced, is what he is.
I used a great deal of my own recollections. For example, a woman asking something, a German officer and him pulling a gun and shooting, and are the things that I remember from my childhood. My father being slapped on the face because he was not walking in the gutter, and that's at the very beginning when there was no ghetto even. Beside that, the whole general atmosphere, the detail of the German officer's attitude, all those things I remember very well. Sometimes a line, like "Don't run."
The moment they're being shoved onto the trains, when the Jews are being shoved onto the trains, a Jewish policeman pulls Szpilman out of the crowd and tells him to get the hell out. And I followed the book and said, the man says to him, "Run." And when we came to that moment, we were working through it in detail, Roman said to me, "No, I'll tell you what happened to me." The chap shouted, "Don't run." Now, I could never have invented that, because in that terrible situation of German guards with armed guards, people being shoved into cattle trucks, it would never have occurred to me to have been so cool about it. And Roman put that in, and I think it works terribly well. It's rather frightening, you know.
I was saved from the Umschlagplatz. Umschlagplatz is that area where the Germans used to gather a great number of people before putting them into the train that went to the death camps. One day I went in looking for my father. I went to the part where they were herding Jews and walked into the hell, in fact. And that was the Umschlagplatz, with thousands of people, some of them lying there for 24 hours or longer, some dying, some crying, some walking around, some screaming, others just completely prostrated, praying. I decided to get out of there. It was guarded by young Polish service in German uniforms. I don't know exactly what they were. It was called Baudienst. And with the little boy that I found there, were younger than me, whose parents were taken before, and he was staying with us because we decided to take care of him with my father. I found that boy, and with him, went to the border of that square. It was a very sunny day, and there was a street which was about 30 feet wide, and that guy with the gun there, well, rather with the carabine. And I asked him to let us, I said that we didn't eat anything for long, for 24 hours, and I want to just go home and get some bread and we'll be right back. And the guy looked at us and he says, go. And I grabbed that little boy, Stefan was his name, and started running, and he said, don't run. We crossed the thing into a doorway, and then I knew all passages through various courtyards and rubble, etc. I saw that a part of it was completely empty, and it was full of furniture, feathers, pillows, just things thrown out of the window, and nobody, desert. That scene inspired the long walk, which I have in the film, after the deportation. And this guy saved my life. That don't run, I had to use.
Have you seen Adrien Brody? He's tall, handsome, long nose. Have you seen him?
Roman and I grew pretty close because of the nature of this film and how personal it was to him and what an integral part I played to it. He's very hands-on. He's much more hands-on than anyone that I've ever worked with, I think. And I've had the privilege of working with some tremendously gifted directors.
Doesn't have to go to show that he's mad, you know?
But Roman has this enthusiasm and this wonderful energy that really is inspirational. And he works himself to the bone, and he'll work you to the bone. And I tend to push myself very far, and he would push me further. It's a unique situation because Roman is a survivor, and he survived similar things that Szpilman survived. He's a survivor telling this story about a survivor.
It's very difficult to determine what makes a man survive, but I suspect that music helped him tremendously, that the will to sit behind the piano again in front of a huge theater were definitely motives that helped him to survive. Naturally, the closest to your heart are emotional ties with the closed one, with your family. And undoubtedly, he hoped seeing them again, even if he has been informed that they went to death. You don't believe it 100%. There's always a little spark of hope. But having learned that his family is dead, what do you live for? You live for something which is your passion. And therefore, I think that music played an enormous role in his survival.
What if you take his hands, and pull,
My passion concerns movie making. This is my passion, and not the subject, actually. Subject is secondary, but that subject gives you more reason for it. I think that this subject inspired all involved. from the director of photography to the last extra, I could feel it, I knew it. I mean, the atmosphere on the set in this picture was really extraordinary. I wish I could have that again. It just doesn't happen on every film. I don't remember anybody who would be completely devoted to our cause during this adventure. But as far as the emotion goes, I think that within the crew, the reactions during the shoot, I could see in the piano scenes between Szpilman and the German officer. I could see how very much the members of the crew were moved, particularly women. I did not live this type of experience yet on my set. And just feeling it was contagious to me.
What moved me terribly was the scene where the families are being herded off the Umschlagplatz and long lines of them packed into the crowded boxcars to be taken to the gas chambers. And the moving scenes, the last looks of the father, of the mother, how they're being shoved in and put and beaten up, because I knew exactly that this is how my family went off. And I was really shaken up by it. It was so realistic, even the viciousness of the Jewish militia who were so eager to help the Germans because hoping to maybe delay their own death, which in the end they didn't. But they were so eager to please the master, the way they were beating up their own people and shoving and pushing them in to please. It was so realistic. At one point, Roman turned to me and said, "Gene, isn't that just horrible?" He was also shaken up by what he's created. So it was not an easy picture.
The emotionally challenging stuff was very difficult. And just staying in that state of mind for so long was difficult. And it was very isolated. And being away from your culture and your loved ones for half a year, playing a man who's hated and put through the ringer is really difficult.
Adrien understood right away that it was not going to be showy performance. It's going to be very flat like that. That it has to be very realistic.
I remember we were shooting inside one day and Roman loved that there was steam coming out of my mouth, and I was probably 135 pounds at the time. And everybody's wearing these down parkas and it's freezing and we're in an abandoned building, and he would get so furious if a heater came near the building. And it's kind of wonderful because it's real, and when you see me being cold, I am freezing. And you know, there's something about that.
I wanted it to look like scenes in life. I didn't want to give more than it's necessary.
The difficulty is when you're alone and not interacting with other actors. And there were weeks where I was just working without another actor, alone in a room. And you have to have a lot of discipline and not to try and create some unnecessary business because you feel like you're going to be boring alone in this room. And you know, Roman was very helpful in guiding me and keeping me along those lines. I was very excited about getting this role, and in an effort to be as truthful as possible, I decided to get rid of my apartment, drop my phone lines, sell my car, basically lose touch with most people that I knew, aside from a few key friends and loved ones. And because the character loses so much, I wanted to kind of have a glimpse of what that loss would feel like. So I did this prior to leaving home and basically showed up with everything I owned. I stopped listening to my kind of music and I cut out television. I would have piano lessons every day because it was very important for Roman that I learn to play so that he could actually use it. And fortunately, I was able to pick up a lot pretty quickly. I practiced all the time, and I starved myself because the character basically didn't eat for quite a long period of time. And so I couldn't eat very much for a while, and I lost about 30 pounds. It was a lot.
We were lucky enough, having found an actor who played piano, not as a pianist, but he can play. So we gave him an extensive training, and every free moment during the shooting, he spent at the piano prof. He would have a piano or at least a keyboard in his trailer, and whenever he went off the set, he would go and work the piano. Of course, several months before he trained, and that seemed to be enough for the few scenes when we see him actually playing. We knew exactly which part will be necessary, and he worked very hard on it.
I think it was really important to Roman, and in hindsight, I'm so glad that I learned to play it because I can still play portions of it. It was very challenging. You know, I grew tremendously from it.
I think the fact that Szpilman was a great artist in life, it only helped him because the German officer who saves his life take interest in Szpilman because of his playing piano.
I think what's interesting about this figure is he is the symbol of hope, my character. But he is not specially heroic. He's doing what everybody's supposed to do, what you as a human being would do, what you think you would have done. Not many people did it, he did. And so through that, and in the context with the film, he becomes this kind of like, I would say, like light figure.
Well, all that is known about Hosenfeld is that he helped some other people before, because he wrote himself a diary. And parts of this diary are in the possession of his family. Incidentally, his son wrote me a letter learning that I'm doing the film and hoping that his father will be well portrayed. I answered that he can be convinced that we're going to deal with it honestly. Besides that, we know that he died in the Soviet concentration camp and that he was very much aware of the cruelty of the German army and the way they treated prisoners, particularly Jews. He writes about it. And the fragments of this diary are printed in the book of Szpilman, so whoever is interested in it can find the details. As far as the Germans go, those who play the German officers, they were playing roles, they are actors. And very recently, I organized a screening for the crew and for the actors in Babelsberg. And I saw those guys without the costumes. You know, first I cast them, so I saw them briefly, and then we started dressing them up for the Nazis right away, changing eventually the haircut, color of the hair, putting the uniforms on them and making the real Nazis. And these were the people with whom I lived on the set. These were the German monsters in the movie. And then at that screening, I saw them again without all that garb. Their hair sometimes completely blonde, dyed with earrings, glasses, charming, intelligent, delightful people, really. Really nice people. And that was a shock to me, because I thought that those people that we saw during the war performing the most despicable acts could have been dressed and look like those actors whom I saw. It was some kind of realization, you know, a realization that anyone is capable of anything at a given time in history.
I think there are a number of really important messages of this film. Obviously, it depicts, you know, the evil nature of man and humanity, but it also illustrates the strength of music and how one man's love of music really helps him survive, and survival of the human spirit. I think another important message is that although the result of the Holocaust is attributed to the German nation. There were German citizens of conscience who refused to participate in carrying out evil deeds. It's a really unsentimental, wonderful journey, and has a lot of hope in it, and a lot of strength through all of the pain in this world.
That's the big theme, I think. It's about hope where there shouldn't be any. It's about survival where it's actually impossible to survive. It's about the spirit, it's about the will to live. It's about still within the bad there's some good. In the good there's some bad. It's not black and white. The film is about life. It's a great film about a great dying, but the film in the end is about life.
I think that the audience will walk away with a lasting emotion, that they will be able to identify with the victim of that period. I hope that this film may somehow contribute to the efforts of those who don't want that this type of scenario reoccurs in the nearest future.